My ex-wife, Claire, who cheated on me and left our family a few years ago, recently showed up at my door with a child from another man and tried to restore the relationship. I didn't even discuss the idea. I slammed the door in her face. Let me tell you a story. Claire is 34 now, and I'm 36. We met while working at the same job. We hit it off, started dating, and 2 years later we tied the knot. By the time we were married for 3 years, we already had 2 daughters who are now 9 and 7 years old. The second pregnancy was not planned, and Claire was far from happy about it. I made it clear that I would support whatever choice she made. I didn't want her to feel forced into something she didn't want. In the end, she decided not to terminate the pregnancy. After the birth of our first daughter, everything was going great. We were happy, deeply in love, and life seemed wonderful. But everything changed when our second pregnancy came. Claire began to become moody, snapping at me and often criticizing our eldest daughter for trivial things. At first, I thought it was hormones and tried to brush it off, thinking it would pass. But it didn't. On the contrary, it got worse. It got to the point where my eldest daughter and I started walking on eggshells around her. I took on most of the household duties, even though Claire was supposed to stay at home. She quit her job when our first child was born to focus on the household while I worked. That was until her second pregnancy. When she got pregnant again, Claire constantly complained that she was too tired to cope with the house and children. To ease her burden, I hired a housekeeper, even though it was a drain on our budget. I wasn't making much money at the time, but I wanted to make her life easier. I thought that after the birth of our second daughter, Claire would return to housekeeping and childcare, as we had originally planned. It is important to note that I was not one of those men who expect their wives to do all the housework. I would come home from work and continue to help out even when I was dead tired. After Claire gave birth to our youngest daughter, I thought it would only be a matter of a few months before she recovered and we got into a routine. But the months dragged on and nothing changed. Claire remained as irritable as ever and didn't even lift a finger around the house. She spent most of her days in front of the TV. She hardly spent any time with her children, and sometimes even paid our neighbor to take them to the park. I don't want to sound petty, but it was painful. I worked long hours to provide for us, while she didn't make even the slightest effort. In the end, the housekeeper did almost everything, cleaning, cooking, etc., which of course cost a lot of money. I tried to pay all the bills and still hoped to save for our daughter's future. But saving seemed impossible when Claire didn't contribute. About 6 months after our youngest daughter was born, I realized that I had to make a sacrifice. I decided to have a serious talk with Claire. I arranged for my parents to watch the girls for the whole day so that we wouldn't be interrupted. When I sat her down, I told her that I realized she was exhausted after 2 pregnancies, but I really needed her to contribute. I explained that we couldn't afford to keep paying the housekeeper to do everything, and that if she could take on some of the responsibilities, we could redefine the housekeeper's tasks and save some money. Her reaction was immediate and dismissive. She flatly refused, insisting that she was too busy with the kids to do anything else. She then shifted the blame to me, saying that I needed to earn more money instead of complaining about her. I tried to convince her, explaining that I was already doing my best, and that in order for our marriage to work, she had to meet me halfway. I also mentioned that she hardly spent any time with the children. The maid mentioned that Claire often left them in front of the TV watching ridiculous reality shows. This turned out to be a huge mistake. Claire exploded at me, accusing me of spying on her through the housekeeper. Then she started ranting about how I was putting unfair pressure on her, claiming that I expected everything from her while I was sitting in the office, barely working for several hours a day. She also accused me of being the problem, claiming it was my fault that we couldn't afford a housekeeper. She went as far as to say it was disgraceful of me to ask her for help since, as the man and the head of the family, I was supposed to provide everything. It was maddeningly irrational. She seemed to latch onto any excuse to justify her behavior, while making me feel like I was out of line for expecting her to contribute to the household. Eventually, the conversation escalated into a full-blown argument. At one point, she called me a loser, saying I couldn't afford someone like her. I didn't hold back and shot back, calling her a lazy freeloader who had failed as a mother since even our older daughter was scared of her. I said she was now failing as a wife too. My words must have struck a nerve because she suddenly shoved me with such force that I stumbled backwards. I lost my balance, crashed into the coffee table, shattered the glass, and ended up injured. I had to be rushed to the hospital. Claire was tearful and apologetic the entire time, but that didn't erase what had happened. Thankfully, my injuries were minor, just a few superficial scratches on my back, but the incident left me shaken. I realized how easily things could have gone much worse, and I couldn't trust her anymore. I told her she needed to move out. I couldn't risk her losing control again, especially with the kids in the house. I called my parents and asked them to watch over the girls until Claire was gone. For the next week, she begged me to reconsider, promising it would never happen again, but I stood firm. Filing for divorce crossed my mind, but Claire pleaded for one last chance. Reluctantly, I agreed under one condition. She would move in with her parents and start therapy. Only when a therapist declared she was mentally and emotionally stable would I consider letting her come back. I wanted to believe she could get better, especially since her behavior seemed so out of character. I suspected something deeper was at play. After all, happy, well-adjusted people don't act that way. And for the sake of our daughters, I didn't want to make a hasty decision that would leave them without their mother. So, I put the divorce on hold and decided to give our marriage one last shot. While Claire lived with her parents, my parents moved in with me to help take care of the kids. Claire and I both committed to family counseling, and for a while, it seemed like we were making progress. I stayed in touch with her therapist, who diagnosed her with postpartum depression. Her aggression, which had been so out of character for her, was one of the symptoms. The therapist assured me she was improving, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. It felt like we might actually get through this. A year passed, and I cautiously began allowing her to visit the girls, but only under my supervision. Over time, Claire began to resemble her old self again. I was relieved to see the changes and believed we were slowly repairing our relationship. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction, until suddenly it wasn't. Out of nowhere, Claire stopped attending our counseling sessions. She also stopped replying to most of my messages, although her therapist assured me she was still making progress in her individual sessions. None of it made sense. For weeks, I tried to get answers, but Claire insisted she just needed time for herself. This evasiveness dragged on for almost 3 months. I finally decided to visit her at her parents' house to figure out what was going on. Up until then, I had respected her request not to come by. Her parents had always been openly hostile towards me, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. Claire had also warned me that showing up would only lead to unnecessary drama. But with her pulling away more and more, I felt I had no other choice. When I arrived, I expected to find her there, but she wasn't home. I asked her parents where she was, and they flat out refused to tell me. Then, without another word, they slammed the door in my face. It felt like they slammed the door with a certain smugness, and an unsettling feeling crept over me. Standing on their porch, I decided to call Claire right then and there. I tried dialing her number repeatedly, but she didn't pick up. With every ring that went unanswered, my unease grew. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to find out what was going on for myself. I walked around the house, knowing that her parents often left the kitchen's inner door open, but I didn't even need to go inside. As I reached the backyard, I spotted Claire sitting on the swings. The bad news? She wasn't alone. She was kissing a man I'd never seen before. Even though it's been years since that moment, it seared into my memory like a scar. Watching them together was one of the most gut-wrenching moments of my life, and the image refuses to fade. The guy must have seen me out of the corner of his eye, because he pulled away abruptly. Claire turned around just as I was walking away, heading back to my car. She chased after me, calling out, trying to stop me. I was too stunned to listen. When she tried to grab my arm, I pushed her off and told her not to touch me. She stopped, and I left. By the time I got home, I had already decided to block her on every platform. Phone, email, social media. Everything. I wasn't interested in her excuses or explanations. I told my parents what had happened and asked for their help finding a lawyer. From that point on, I didn't see or hear from Claire again until we had to meet with a mediator to discuss the terms of our divorce. By then, I was emotionally numb. I went through the motions for the sake of my daughters, but inside, I felt empty. When I learned that Claire was voluntarily giving up her parental rights, I didn't feel much of anything. Not relief, not anger, just emptiness. She said she wanted to be with the man I caught her kissing that day, John, a childhood friend she reconnected with after moving back in with her parents. She admitted she'd fallen in love with him. Her parents, it turned out, fully supported her decision. They were thrilled she was with John, someone they'd apparently hoped she'd end up with all along. According to them, Claire was finally choosing herself and her happiness, as if she had ever put anyone else before herself in the first place. The divorce dragged on for months because Claire, despite cheating on me and abandoning her children, demanded alimony. It was outrageous, but she pushed for it anyway. I worked closely with my lawyer to ensure she got nothing. After all, I had been the sole provider for years while she contributed nothing but complaints. In the end, we succeeded. Claire walked away with nothing but the life she'd chosen with John. It's been 5 years since the divorce was finalized, and looking back, those months were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. But I couldn't afford to crumble. My daughters needed me more than ever, and I was determined to step up for them. My parents were a rock during that time, helping me juggle work and raising the girls. I'll never forget their support. I owe them so much. Now, 5 years later, I can honestly say that separating from Claire was the best decision I ever made. Life has improved in every way imaginable. I'm earning more, and with no one to support but myself and my daughters, I've been able to provide them with a much better life. We've moved into a bigger house, and my parents live nearby, visiting often. I've built a strong circle of friends who genuinely care about me, and my daughters are thriving. They're happy, and so am I. Looking back, what felt like a disaster at the time turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I'm grateful I chose to leave Claire behind, even if it was painful. It gave me the chance to rebuild a life I could truly be proud of. I thought I had everything a man could need, and for that, I was grateful to the universe. Life was steady, peaceful, until a few days ago when Claire suddenly reappeared. It was a quiet morning. The girls were at school, and I was about to head out to work when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Claire standing there, holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. My stomach dropped. I knew immediately he was her son. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. Claire broke down into tears and started apologizing, saying she was ready to make amends. She claimed she wanted to reunite, become part of our family again, and give our marriage another chance. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. After everything she'd done, she had the audacity to show up years later and decide, unilaterally, that she wanted her old life back. I couldn't listen to it. Before she could say much more, I told her flat out that we were no longer her family. I reminded her that the day she cheated on me with John was the day she stopped being my wife. The divorce was just paperwork. She'd already made her decision back then. And as for the girls, she'd given up custody of them voluntarily, so she had no right to come back and claim us as her family now. With that, I slammed the door in her face and told her to leave. I didn't want her anywhere near my house. To be honest, I wanted to yell, to let out all the anger and hurt I felt, but I held back. There was a child with her, her son, and I couldn't bring myself to make a scene in front of him. I could hear her sobbing outside the door for a few minutes after I closed it, but I stayed where I was, determined not to give in. Once everything went quiet, I left for work, trying to shove the whole encounter out of my mind. I knew if I dwelled on it, I might start second-guessing myself, and I couldn't let that happen. By the time I got home, I had almost convinced myself to forget the entire incident. But as soon as I walked through the door, my phone rang. It was my parents. They were furious with me, demanding to know why I'd turned Claire away. Apparently, she'd gone to them after I shut the door on her, crying hysterically. That's when they dropped the real bombshell. They had been the ones to give her my new address. In fact, they'd even encouraged her to come to me. According to them, Claire had reached out about a month ago, saying she was divorcing John and wanted to make things right with me and the kids. My parents thought it was time for me to consider my daughter's needs. In their minds, Claire deserved another chance because, as they put it, there's no better mother for your girls than their own mother. They said they'd been planning this for weeks, believing it was in the best interest of my daughters to have their mother back in their lives. That's why they encouraged Claire to show up and even coached her on what to say. I was livid. It wasn't their place to forgive Claire or decide she deserved a second chance. And to do all this behind my back? It was reckless and beyond disrespectful. What if the girls had been home? Did they even think about the potential damage this could have caused? I told them exactly how I felt, but they stood their ground. They argued that because they had helped raise the girls during the divorce and still helped me with childcare sometimes, they had just as much of a say in what was best for the kids. According to them, I had no right to dismiss their opinion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Yes, I respect and appreciate everything my parents have done for me and the girls, but these are my daughters. My responsibility. The idea that they could make decisions about my family without consulting me was absurd. We ended up arguing. They accused me of being selfish, saying I was letting my pride get in the way of what was best for my daughters. They claimed Claire was a changed person and that they had thoroughly vetted her before deciding she deserved another chance. Even when I reminded them that she had legally signed away her parental rights, they brushed it off. They insisted they would never endanger me or the girls, implying that I was being unreasonable by refusing to let Claire back into our lives. What stung the most was when they accused me of damaging my daughters' lives. They said I was too arrogant to admit that children need their mother and that I was being selfish for not giving Claire the chance to be part of their lives again. It's been a few days since Claire showed up at my door, and I've had plenty of time to think. Even now, I can't see how I acted selfishly or unfairly. Does refusing to give my ex-wife another chance to be a mother make me a monster? I don't believe it does. A week has passed since that day, and during this time, I've uncovered something that has left me absolutely reeling. The truth about Claire's relationship with my parents has come to light, and it's so revolting that I still can't fully process it. What shocks me the most is how easily they betrayed me, without hesitation or remorse. It turns out that my parents not only gave Claire my address, but they've been secretly keeping in touch with her all these years. After the divorce, I cut all ties with her, but apparently my parents didn't. They held on to the belief that eventually she would come to her senses. While they didn't talk often, maybe once a month, it was enough to feel like a complete betrayal. Here's what I found out. When I filed for divorce, John forced Claire to sign away her parental rights. He gave her an ultimatum. Either she left her family behind to start a new life with him, or she fought to maintain contact with her kids, which meant risking her relationship with him. According to my parents, Claire agonized over the decision, but in the end, she chose John. She walked away from the family she already had to build a new one with him. My parents told me that Claire reached out to them shortly after I filed for divorce to explain her situation. She claimed she felt trapped, cornered by both me and John. On one side, I was fighting for full custody with supervised visitation rights. On the other, John was demanding she give up her kids entirely if she wanted to stay with him. Even if she had tried to fight for custody, her odds were slim. Her history of anger issues and the circumstances surrounding our divorce would have been enough to sway any judge against her. In her eyes, it was a no-win situation. If she fought, she risked losing both her children and John. And that's when my parents decided to get involved. They met with Claire privately. She begged them to let her maintain contact with the girls in secret and to act as intermediaries. She knew that after signing away her rights, she wouldn't even be entitled to supervised visitation. But my parents, still holding their own custody rights as grandparents, decided to help her anyway. They agreed to secretly facilitate meetings between Claire and the kids, all without my knowledge. For years, my parents allowed Claire to see my daughters behind my back. They claimed they did it because they were moved by her story and believed that separating a mother from her children was cruel. Apparently, betraying their own son didn't bother them one bit. Every time I dropped my girls off at their house, my parents would arrange for Claire to come over and spend time with them. My daughters never told me because my parents bribed them with toys and sweets to keep quiet. Whenever I asked the girls what they'd done at Grandma and Grandpa's house, they would tell me they'd played with a friend. I had always assumed they meant one of my parents' actual friends, someone I already knew. But no, my parents had coached them to refer to Claire as a friend in case I ever asked too many questions. When I finally confronted my parents about this, I couldn't believe it. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My daughters had lied to me, too, but I forgave them immediately. They're just kids. They didn't know better. It was clear Claire and my parents had manipulated and intimidated them into keeping quiet. After hearing this from my parents, I sat down with my daughters and asked if they had been seeing their mother without telling me. They broke down crying and confessed that they couldn't tell me because they believed God would punish them if they did. Claire and my parents must have drilled it into my daughters' heads that something terrible would happen if they ever told me the truth. That's why they were so secretive and evasive whenever I asked about their time at my parents' house. It breaks my heart knowing how much they were manipulated. On top of that, I feel like I failed as a father for never pressing further when they mentioned a friend. For all I knew, it could have been someone far worse than Claire, and I wouldn't have had a clue. But that ends now. I've already filed for restraining orders against Claire and my parents to make sure this never happens again. I have written proof of their betrayal because my parents sent me a letter a couple of days after our argument. They must have thought explaining everything would soften my heart and convince me to forgive them. They wrote about how Claire desperately wanted to remain a mother to her daughters without giving up the love of her life. But all that letter did was cement my decision. It made it crystal clear that none of them could ever be trusted again. The irony of it all is almost laughable. Claire gave up her parental rights and had to sneak around like a criminal to see her daughters. All because John didn't want her to have any ties to her past. He was supposed to be her one true love, but now he's leaving her, and it's all been for nothing. According to my parents, John is done with her. They had a child together, but John doesn't want anything to do with either Claire or their son. He recently got a job offer and plans to move out of state in a few months. Claire, on the other hand, has just started working and their son is now in daycare. She refuses to move with him, which has led to constant arguments. Things came to a head 3 months ago when John told her he was leaving. He flat out said he was done being a family man because it meant sacrificing his future and happiness for her, and he wasn't willing to do that anymore. Apparently, my parents thought sharing all this would make me pity Claire. If anything, it just reaffirmed that karma has a way of balancing things out. I've already consulted with my lawyer, and the restraining order requests have been filed. My daughters and I had a serious conversation, and I made it clear that from now on, they wouldn't be seeing their grandparents or their mother ever again. It's a lot for them to process, but they seem to be handling it well so far. We're continuing with therapy to help them work through everything. I know this will be hard on them, but at least it's over now. Claire and my parents have already received the notices for the restraining orders, and we're scheduled to appear in court soon. I've blocked all of them on every platform and warned my friends not to engage with them if they try to reach out. I've also taken steps to increase security around our home and have been working remotely for the past few days to keep a close eye on things. I spoke with the school administration and explained the situation. Initially, I considered keeping my daughters home for a while, but I decided against it. I don't want their education to suffer because of Claire and my parents' actions. The school is aware of the situation, and their teachers are keeping a close watch to ensure no one but me can pick them up. I'm doing everything in my power to protect my daughters from this nightmare, but I have no doubt Claire and my parents will try to find a way to interfere. So far, everything has been going well, and I'm hopeful that once the restraining orders are firmly in place, Claire and my parents will stay far away from us. The court granted the restraining orders, which means that for the next 5 years, those 3 can't come near me or my daughters without facing serious legal consequences. It's a relief, but I'm not letting my guard down just yet. I'm still keeping all the security measures in place. After all, the last time I saw them, they were furious. I won't take any chances when it comes to my daughter's safety. We've been attending family counseling regularly, and I genuinely believe that in the coming months, we'll make even more progress. In fact, we've already seen significant improvements. My daughters are starting to feel more secure and open, and it's clear that they're healing from everything we've been through. Right now, my only focus is their happiness. That's all I want and all I need.